everybody. Welcome to this week, News from the Real World, where we talk about the top 10 comments the top 10 articles that have generated comments over the past week. My name's Allie.
Allie,
She, for her.
You should try and do it again, but don't say
God damn it, Parker.
Then there's the stinger. There's the stinger.
What just happened?
This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's podcast, News from the Real World, where we talk about the top 10 articles from this week and the comments that all of you all have made on them. So I'll start. My name's Allie. She, her, hers. I'm a third-year SMPM grad.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. She, her. I am a second-year sound grad.
And I'm Damien. I am a third-year costume design grad. He, him.
And I'm Parker, he, him, first year stage production management grad.
And today the logo is wondering what happened to Goatye. I mean, that dude just dropped somebody that I used to know, and then he vanished. What's up with that?
He is now somebody that I used to know.
Yeah, I think he screwed the punchline there, logo.
Isn't that an article this week? So anyway.
Oh my God.
We're going to start this week. Why remote work makes people less productive and what to do about it, by behavioral scientist Kristen Berman on fastcompany.com. So this article basically talks about how it talks about the difference between being physically at work and having that atmosphere and motivation and accountability, and now working from home and not having the in-person accountability, the weekly meetings, stuff like that to actually keep you productive. And then there are a couple of things that she says at the end for how we can bring this motivation and accountability to our home work so that we can stay on track. Some of the things she mentions are keeping the video on for the whole meeting instead of turning it off and having the temptation to kind of like surf the web. Articulating, coordinating start and end times for the workday so that you have more of a set schedule. Posting public updates about daily or weekly progress. And adding more deadlines and decision points. And putting meetings back to back instead of scattering them throughout the day. I had some feelings about this one. It was very corporate. And while she did, when she mentioned how all of the accountability system that businesses have agreed upon, you can transfer that to theater. Like sitting next to your team members every day, even though it's not the 9 to 5. Like weekly meetings where we report on stuff that we've done, team meetings, the progress trackers, stuff like that. Like that you can translate into theater, but I do think it was very corporate minded. I also did not believe, interestingly enough, as a behavioral therapist, I would have thought that this would have been something that she had brought up. But stuff like why homework is different than at work, she didn't really bring up any of those factors. So like the fact that people are not just choosing to work from home while the rest of their normal lives continue, like they have their kids at home or they have their older parents at home or they're completely alone and haven't had social interaction for, 8 weeks. It's like there are so many other factors that are leading to not being productive, even when you have to work from home, that I don't think were accounted for in here. And like we've been talking about in past weeks, productivity, I think, has become a very different thing and out of necessity. Because we're going through a really tough time as individuals. And so it's like, how do you expect, I have a friend, he and his wife are both lawyers, but they work for the state and not for the state. Well, I guess we're all in different states. Anyway, they work for the state, and the state has mandated like working 8 to 5 every day, clock in, clock out, like send us your like they would when they are at work. But he has 2 kids, and they're in the house, and they're trying to homeschool them and keep them entertained, and his dad is sick. And it's like, how are you expecting people to do their normal functions under abnormal circumstances? So that was my take on it.
That's fair.
I think it's interesting how, over the past couple of weeks that we've been getting these articles during the pandemic, you hinted at it about just like what productivity means these days. But I do find it fascinating that we're getting such like polar opposite ends of the spectrum consistently versus it's like in terms of you either get an article that says, don't worry about being productive. It's okay. Like this is like, we're in a really rough time. And then you get the other side that's like, this is how you need to be productive in order to maintain normalcy.
If you don't,
and it's like
quarantine with a new skill
right.
or whatever.
Right. But like, and I honestly don't know where I land. I think I probably lean more towards like the redefining productivity side of things in terms of just like, you don't have to be productive, but that could also just have to be because like, I don't want to work on my thesis, but it's just been living through this has really kind of been eye-opening in that aspect in terms of like how we define productivity. And I say that like by we, I mean like as theater professionals, like how we define productivity, I think is going to be forever changed, but I'm curious to see what happens once we get out of the pandemic. Like, are we going to redefine productivity or are we going to lax a bit? So
I'm interested to see what happens with the end, because I no longer have work lined up immediately after classes end. So now I feel like I'm going to be in the place that everyone else was in a month ago. Because right now I have school to kind of occupy my mind, and like my productivity goes into schoolwork in a somewhat, although it's online, it's still a somewhat normal way to be productive. And when that goes away and I like don't have anything to fill my time or whatever, I feel like I'll resonate with these articles even a little bit more. And going back to Allie's article, like the thing that came to mind for me is the immediacy of how you can switch between like work mode and home mode when you're at home. Like you can shut your laptop and immediately watch Netflix, or like immediately go cook dinner, and then you have to like get yourself back into doing work and going through that process instead of just like sitting in StuTech for a few hours between classes and knocking out some homework. Like that's kind of where my brain went.
That motivation to not keep yourself distracted.
Yeah.
Though I didn't like the article because, I mean, it's saying that, jobs and in-person jobs is so good because, there's this structure and you're forced to do these things. But, people who have worked at home before this crisis talk about how they get so much more work done at home because they're able to just do work and there's not intrusions of other people walking by and saying hello, and that social aspect, or, meetings that should have been an email every 10, 15 minutes. And I don't think she takes into consideration the fact that, most people I would say are very good at being externally motivated, but there are few people who are very internally motivated who, even through all this can still maintain their lifestyle and the hardcore 9 to 5, just because that's what they are like. Whether or not they're in a corporate work 9 to 5 environment.
Yeah. So while we're social distancing, how do we come to the dinner table? It's a bad segue, but it's all I got.
that was good. Just say my dinner table is my work desk, so that's a little easy. Oh, don't show this part of the video.
Well, that's the top of the article.
I just watching this $2,000 MacBook get destroyed over and over again is just, oh lordy lord.
So Hannah, tell us what we're looking at here.
ridiculously long chain reaction, bringing social distancing to the dinner table. A Rube Goldberg machine, because we are missing seeing the freshmen and their trials and tribulations through Rube this semester. So this 5.5 minute Rube Goldberg machine done by Joseph Herscher is, oh God, it's so funny. It's hysterical. It's over the top. You never quite know what's about to happen next. I love Rube Goldberg machines. They're so crazy and insane. This was just a fun time to watch. I don't know what it really has to do with like taking social distancing to the extreme in a humorous and like Onion article way, but that,
I do think it's funny how different, like how creativity specifically, not even like productivity, because like that's not producing anything for consumption, that's not, whatever, but like how creativity has manifested itself during this time, where it's like sometimes you just got to create a 25-minute Rube Goldberg, like that's just what you need to do that day.
There are people who have been doing these YouTube videos for years now, and they're all like that extravagant.
Frankly, I want to make one now. Like when I get some free time, like it just motivated me to want to try and make one and just see how it works out, Obviously not ruining my laptop.
Meanwhile, I'm like, what is free time? Like,
right.
Just kidding. We have plenty of it right now. No, I will agree though. Watching that computer just
bite it
was very, I was like, what?
It's funny because like even the stuff I have to do, I don't want to do, and I want to do fun stuff like that. Like I will choose cross stitching every time over, thesis or seminar paper, stuff like that. Like every time.
But where's your Rube? That's the question. Have you done your Rube Goldberg?
I think if I tried to do a Rube Goldberg, my cat would destroy it.
I've seen a couple that actually use animals or like small children as part of the
Rube small children.
Or small children. They're one and the same. Like, no difference.
There was the one with the cats. There were like the multiple cats, and it relied on them to like be drawn to something and hit it. Yeah, I liked that one. So, like during this trying time, we just need a laugh,
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And sometimes you have to use fake laughter. So the article is in the conversation. It's "We Need a Laugh, Even If It Is Fake, A History of Canned Laughter." And it is by, can you scroll down, Ellie? I can't remember who it's by. Charlie Watts. So it's funny. No pun intended. But this is actually the second article we've gotten in the past few weeks regarding canned laughter, and just like what it actually, how important, just specifically how important it is for there to be laughs during any sort of live production. This article went a little more, and like there were a couple of video samples, but it also focused in on what's referred to as the laugh box, which was like this basically it sounds like it's literally just a device that is a collection, here it is, a device that allowed a collection of recorded reactions to be falsely inserted into a show. One of the things that I was actually a little surprised to read was that, I don't know why I was surprised, because I feel like this makes sense, but that canned laughter is actually used less these days than it was before. I thought that it was the opposite. I thought like they were saying that nowadays audience laughter is used, however it can be edited. So they'll move the audience reactions around depending on the situation, which I thought was interesting. But so yeah, it's just talking about how there was an example of a show, I think it was Last Leg or Last Laugh, I can't remember what the name of the show is, but where they have tried to do it without the canned laughter, and it just feels so vacant and just feels so, it's cringy. It becomes cringy. It's crazy how like when you watch a show like that and like there is no audience response, you can't help but just feel bad. It's almost like I feel like it's like the equivalent of watching a stand-up comedian like just bomb. Like that's kind of the vibe that I get from like, you know, the thought of watching a sitcom without canned laughter is just, I don't know. It like gives me a little bit of anxiety because I'm just like, oh, they're doing so well, but nobody cares.
Yeah, it's a good joke. It's just like,
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, like, I kind of want to, I wonder, I'm sure somewhere on the internet it exists, but like, if there are like versions of sitcoms, like where you can watch episodes without the canned laughter just to see
Oh,
what
yeah.
it's like. Like, I watch like, you know, Love, Will and Grace, and I'll watch like Golden Girls. I'm just so curious to see, like, if I find that show as funny without the canned laughter or without the recorded laughter.
The big one that I always see portrayed is people put up Big Bang Theory without the laugh tracks, and oh man, is it bad?
It's very cringy.
I kind of want to watch one now just to see what it's like to experience that cringe.
Well, like the late night talk show hosts, because I'll watch like Colbert or Trevor Noah, and like because they just do it alone in their house or apartment, and there's no laughter even when they say laugh lines, and it's just always so funny to them just like you can see them fidget because they're, you know, they started in you know, either stand-up comedy or improv, so when like a joke bombs, you can see that like heart palpitation that they still have.
Yeah.
And I do think it's interesting, like, Hannah, you just brought up a really good point. The fact that now there's no laughter. Like, you don't have that live audience laughing, and so it's just silent. And then they move on to the next thing. So it's a very interesting... So I watch MASH because I'm, like, 80 years old.
I love MASH!
And I have the whole disc set, and they give you the option to you're laughing they give you the option to take off the laugh track, and it's not that it's cringy, it's that it's so serious, because like so many of their jokes are like, no, war is hell, like people are dying, and like when it's like dark humor but there's a laugh track, it's like ha, 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 ha. But when there's no laugh track, it's like, no, we're calling you out. Like, this is, you know, this is like this is a social commentary in a TV show. And so it's very interesting.
Speaking of laughter, this next article is certainly going to get a genuine laugh. Yeah, you see that segue?
Oh, that was good.
The WWE to continue taping, airing live after Florida governor deems pro wrestling essential. By Samuel J. Gross. Samantha, oh my God, J. Gross, on postgazette.com. The article is essentially exactly what the headline reads. The governor declared WWE to be essential. So they continued taping. They are, according to the WWE, practicing safe guidelines and only keeping a small number of people together at a time, and only essential crew are there to produce these shows. They're obviously filming without any audience, so it's still a live recording, but there's just no one in the stands.
Everyone in glove and mask.
Right, like
my favorite is the statement, the WWE statement at the very end of the article reads, "As a brand that has been woven into the fabric of society, WWE and its superstars bring families together and deliver a sense of hope, determination, and preservation."
I can't.
It's one of the most Florida
anime
statements I have ever. That truly is just... My roommate's from Florida, and I send her shit about Florida all the time if it comes across like my newsfeed. I think one of my favorite things that I've ever heard about Florida was it being described as a swampy Walmart. And I was like, that's literally like, that is 100%. And this just further proves that. So this whole like essential, non-essential, like reopening of states thing hits a sore spot for me, just because like Georgia has essentially reopened. And I have family in Georgia. I mean, I'm from Georgia, but my parents are in Georgia, and like most of my family is in Georgia. So just I can't wrap my head around like I can't even fully put my thoughts together on this whole thing. Like, and I know that this is supposed to be this sort of like laughable, like lighthearted article, but it is something that has been really bothering me this past week. Is just like, oh man, I mean, I'm sure y'all saw I post something about it on Facebook because I was actually very upset one specific day because there was this woman who was literally arguing with one of my friends on Facebook. One of my friends who's a nurse, and she was like, "This is serious. I'm literally watching people die. Like, please do not listen to the governor." And this woman was arguing with her about how like, but you need to understand that like the economy, like, and she was like, I don't care about the economy. People are dying. Literally, I am working endless hours to keep people alive. Like, I don't care if you can't get your nails done. And it was just like, that like propelled me enough to want to say something on Facebook. But it was just, this is just another example where I'm like, y'all just need to get your shit together. It's getting harder and harder to defend the state of Georgia. I love Georgia. Like, I love I love Atlanta. But Jesus Christ, it's getting so hard to be able to say, like, it's not that bad when you have a governor who literally makes your state look like garbage.
Even Pittsburgh is scheduled to reopen in 2 weeks in Allegheny County. And
I think Ohio's at the same kind of trajectory.
And that's crazy to me. Like, I second all of what you've said, Damien. I mean...
Yeah. My favorite, though, is after I posted, somebody sent me an article that was like kind of defending the other side. And I was like, to make it awkward, it was like one of my friend's moms who sent it to me. And it was like, all I could say was like, thanks, I'll take a look at it. Well, I did go back and take a look at the article. And then I was like, who wrote this article? And I like scrolled down, found the person. It's like an evangelical conservative radio blogger. And I was like, absolutely not. This is not. You're further proving my point.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Yeah, no.
The comments, the student comments on this one are appropriately
sassy.
Upset. Yeah, and sassy. And I do appreciate it. And serious. Like, Owen starts out by saying, all right, so this is dumb. Which, yes. But JD brings up a really good point. He said that the headline is clearly designed to shock those who read it. And, like, we all did, like, laugh in, like, oh, my God, I can't believe this type of way. But it's interesting to think that there are apparently some people, or at least one person, the governor of Florida, who will not be shocked by this. So, like you said, Damien, the mere fact that we have to argue why human life is more important than the economy. And I understand that the economy has repercussions that affect human. I get that. But, like, we won't get to that point if we're not alive. So, like, and you are not God. You do not get to decide who gets to live and who we can expend just because your business is not currently making money. And, like, Owen brings up a good point. He's like, there are silent carriers, like, spreading through all of this. So, like, I'm sorry, Hannah, like you said, are the wrestlers wearing gloves and masks, like, and not ripping those off of each other? Like, let's wrestle from 6 feet away. Like, I don't
disinfectant into themselves before every match.
Oh God.
Jesus.
So it's interesting how, like, people can think that certain things are okay when it's like you don't understand any of it.
People are literally gathering and protesting this. Like, it's mind-blowing, the argument that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's even an argument.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, the fact that this has to be an argument at all.
Yep.
At all. Is ridiculous.
All is not lost. there are some people in the entertainment industry who are taking actions to make sure we get back to work safely.
There we go.
That was a good one.
SAG and extras, you know, the committees are trying to reopen the Hollywood lots so that folks can get back to work and continue producing film, television, and entertainment for us. So this is an article by David Robb, and it says a whole lot of nothing other than, yes, they're working on, you know, setting up protocols for working safely, and you mean making sure that the actors who can't really wear PPE on set because sometimes it won't make sense, are really what they're most worried about, and that they're trying to make sure that everyone still has their healthcare coverage, even freelance and contracted employees that are part of these unions, which is a good thing, at least in these times, because nothing is worse than, you know, going broke trying to not die.
Yeah. I am excited to see what they come up, you know, what these unions come up with and how everything is going to be impacted. You know, and not just like with film, but also with theater, you know, like, I mean, and mostly from like a financial standpoint, I'm looking to see how productions are going to be affected. You know, I'm assuming like not just by nature of what's happened, like I feel like some of the safety protocols are going to involve just smaller crews, if I had to make a guess. But then I'm like, how is that going to affect production in terms of like how long are things going to take to produce? Like, also, like, are we going to write? Like, I'm thinking like from a writer standpoint, is it smarter now to produce or to write stuff that requires less people and like avoid any sort of scenes that are like in a public place that requires like, you know, background and that requires, you know, extras? Like I think we're going to get some really interesting media coming out over the next couple of years, or, you know, like I think this is, I'm interested to see what's produced during the COVID era and what like, and like, so yeah, so just going beyond the whole like safety protocols. I mean, no, it all ties in, just like in terms of like how many people can be on set. And yeah, I mean, I think with theater specifically, I know one of the things that I've been hearing, and like I know some theater companies have started, they're just not hiring designers. Like they're like cutting certain elements of, like, they're not, in order to cut back on money. They're not building sets. They're doing black box sets. They're doing
whatever costumes you've got in stock.
That's how they're reducing their financial burdens. So
well, I know a lot of theaters, a lot of the talk has been, you know, if you got like a 500 seat house, selling, you know, a fifth of the tickets and making sure everyone's spread out all over the theater.
Yeah.
And those are, yeah, definitely conversations that are happening, because it's like, I think it was interesting and heartbreaking to see that transition between, like, in the beginning it was like, well, when we are able to get back, like, it'll be okay, like, we'll, you know, be back and we'll all gather then. And then as it progressed, it's like people aren't going to want to come back in masses for a very long time, nor will it be safe to do so until we have certain things in place. So it's like, right, so if we have, you know, 100
safe too,
right, like 150 people instead of 500, what shows can we actually do so that we still make a profit when we only have 150 people in a house that normally has 500?
And at that point, is it worth it for the risk that's involved?
Yeah. And like, this was,
companies are going to go under in the next couple of years.
This was a article, like, I think a couple weeks ago, where they were talking about, like, or maybe it wasn't even an article, it was on the blog or something, that was like, crews, right, like, do you have stage management or, you know, backstage crews, like, sanitize everything, like the props, the prop table, everything like that, like people wearing gloves and masks when they're backstage, but how do we do that in, like, we can keep our distance, but in fittings you really can't. Just like all these different factors that
it feels
Can't
very
do
much like it's
deals.
not necessary. You know, like it goes to, like, I hate to say this, but to agree with the article we all debated about last week that we'll talk about again later, like, we're not essential, and that risk, like, performance isn't essential, and that risk is almost unnecessary because it could cause spread, you know? Like, it's super sad, and I hate it because it is, like, also my industry and our industry, you know? Like, it's...
I almost just had a moment where I agreed with the WWE.
I was gonna say, but pro wrestling.
But no, well, I mean, entertainment, you know, society, culture, you know, we do theoretically provide an important service to the huddled masses or whatever. So, like, you know, in some respects, authors, you know, theater artists, movie makers, actors, you know, they are important.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
all these other
Yeah. And that's
industries
like
are dying.
what people are turning to right now, you know? So it's like when we can actually get production back up safely, like
Right.
it'll be huge because that's what we've all been consuming during this time, but it's just that's probably a long way away. So on that happy note,
I
Yeah,
was like,
happy fun. Everything is fine.
so
Fine.
what does that schedule look like?
Oh gosh, Sound Girls. This is an article written by a freelance sound designer. She's also a mom.
Nope. I thought her name would be on top. Sorry.
Yes, here it is. Elizabeth Widener. She talks about in this article about how important it was when the quarantine first started, of keeping up that sense of normalcy and keeping a concrete schedule. You know, we get up at 8, we have breakfast. From there, I work, all the way through. Kids are doing schoolwork, I'm doing work, prepping for classes, and then after dinner, you know, especially in the sound industry right now, a lot of audio companies, sampling libraries, digital audio workstation companies are giving a lot of stuff out for free for a short time. And there's all this opportunity to, like, learn new programs and strengthen your skills and, you know, flex those kinds of muscles. But she noticed how it was almost like a second job to kind of go and slowly work through this list of free things. And she really had to kind of cut back and go, like, it's okay if I do one thing that's productive enough for today, and cut it up into small tasks. Essentially, it's a global pandemic. It's okay if you are stressed and anxious, and, you know, but as long as you do one thing, you know, towards making a goal or being productive or doing work, that's enough.
Yeah. I had gone to the doctor a couple weeks ago for something that, like, was already scheduled, and one of the ladies in the front who, like, she's by the door and she takes your temperature and you walk in and all that stuff. And she was talking about how she was talking to the other lady who was running the desk. She was like, I don't know, it's, you know, 10:30 and my husband's texting me that our son is still asleep, and, like, I told him he can't let him do this and he has to get up, and, like, we need a schedule because he doesn't do well without a schedule. And like, she was getting a little worked up, and the other lady just goes, isn't he 3 years old? Like, yeah. She's like, maybe it's okay. Maybe he can sleep full time. It's all good. It's okay. He can have a day or 5. Doesn't matter. It's all good. Like,
Oh my god.
I understand, going back to our first article too, right? Like, this is all about productivity. Like, I understand having a schedule so that you don't lose complete sense of who you are, what day it is, what is happening. Like, I get that. For mental health, for me, that helps. But, like, also take it easy on yourself. Like, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay to not always be productive, because in your daily life, you're not always productive every single second of the day.
Yeah. I mean,
Agreed.
I feel like I was definitely more productive when we were still at school, but that's like, I think it's an environment thing, like being in a different work environment. And it's not necessarily like my schedule. It's just, yeah. I think motivation is the thing. It's like finding the motivation to do it.
Being stuck in the same place, in the same room where you relax and sleep, and then also have to try to do work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to separate those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Rough times.
Right, and like when we talked earlier about people who, you know, work from home anyway, or like did before this or whatever, and, you know, they're productive and that's great and everything. It's like they normally have a setup. Like they chose or somehow worked out that they could do that and then had a setup. Like my brother had knee surgery, and so he's been working from home since last July. So like he's used to it, but he also has like his desk and his routine, and like, you know, they don't have kids. He has a bulldog who sleeps all the time, you know, so it's like it's very different. And it's something that is not forced upon you when you do not expect it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things being forced upon you, in the next article, titled Institutions Do Not Define Our Artistic Practice, by Regina Victor. So it talks, and the reason I say like being forced upon you is because basically she's honing in on the fact that as theater artists, a lot of the times what we create is kind of defined and dictated by the institutions that we work for. She specifically, I believe, is an artistic director in Chicago. And I guess like one of the things that she is kind of like zeroing in on is the fact that, like, you know, we kind of have to remember that we're artists first, and that's what we're, you know, that's why we do it. And that like now that we don't have the pressures of being enclosed in an institution, or necessarily like now is a time for us to kind of explore outside, you know, the metaphorical walls of what we're sometimes dictated to do. You know, she, I think like in the very last paragraph, she makes a very like, you know, produce and make what brings you joy. We are grateful for your presence. Just know that there is equal value in perfecting the practice of being exactly who you are. So I agree. And I think she makes a lot of very, a lot of very good points. My only thing is that at the end, like sadly, like we live in a capitalist world. We need a paycheck. We need, you know, so it's like, I get it, but at the end of the day, like you have to make a living, and sometimes you do have to do what your boss tells you to do. And so like, that's, I mean, like, so like I kind of agreed and disagreed with her. Like, yes, it's great. It's kind of like a nice little reminder, but at the end of the day, like we do have to answer to a specific institution if we want to make money, and if we want food on our tables, and like if we want to pay our rent. So yeah, that's how I felt about that.
Mary Emily brought up a really good point in her comment on this, where she said that the idea that entertainment is a byproduct of an artist's art is actually really important and profound, especially in a time like this where people are turning towards entertainment as something that they need and to rely on to get through this. So I thought that was interesting, where it's like, even like you said, like it's not maybe necessarily why we do the thing, but when you choose to take your art or your passion and make it a profession, then there's a, right, like you said, like then there's a paycheck. So like you have to do the thing,
Right.
even if you still enjoy it, and even if your inspiration and your desire to get into it was not to create the thing itself, it was the process and like the artistry and stuff like that. So I do think it's interesting, and that obviously is before pandemic too. It's like when you make art, you work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like line between arts for art's sake and art for entertainment or a benefactor.
I mean, you know, sadly, just because of how like this industry works and how much money we're making, like we really don't have the luxury of being able to just create things as we want them exactly to be. You know, like we are,
Right.
like, I think of myself, you know, as a designer, like I may want to create this beautiful, you know, gown and like have, you know, the perfect fabric in mind, but I could be working for a theater that's going to be like, no, you're going to have to find the cheap alternative, or you're going to have to make edits. Like, you know, we're consistently being edited and dictated by money. And so like, though the sentiment is great, so like, you know, though it's like, yeah, you know, we want to create beautiful art, but at the end of the day, money is going to control how much of that art we can create and how that art is going to be presented and when that art is going to be presented. So,
And
Look
the
at
demand
all this
for it.
cynical-
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was gonna make a all the undergrads get to listen to all the cynical millennials who it was like, I had to pay my bills.
Well,
I
like,
mean,
the demand for the art itself generates more art, right? So, like, if you're making the art to be consumed by an audience, or not even consumed, but like to be appreciated by an audience, they then give the money to allow you to do more of it, but then you're beholden in a way. So it's,
yeah.
it's not just for itself. You also have that dichotomy. We actually, for seminar, had to watch a video, a documentary about Merrily We Roll Along, and the making of that and how it flopped, and the cast experiences. And it was interesting to me because in there was a lot of like consumerism of art and how it affected that show, that for them it was for the art itself and for being able to do, you know, the next Stephen Sondheim, Hal Prince thing. And it was very interesting, that dichotomy, and how it affected them when it was very clear that like it's a for profit, it's Broadway, it's commercial. So it's like, it really, you know, messed with a lot of them, and a lot of the cast took a very long time to be okay with that and like come back from it. It's interesting. So how we process things through art transitions nicely into this next article, talking about how the 1918 flu wreaked havoc on nearly every country on Earth. So why didn't more artists respond to it in their work? By Taylor Defoe on artnet.com. And we've talked about this before, a couple weeks ago, I think, where it's like it was such a big thing and killed more people than the first war did, and why was it not talked about more? Why was it not in more art? And so this article talks about that, and it has contributions from a curator, Trevor Smith, and an author and museum director, Jane Collier. And they bring up some pieces of art that did actually represent this. The one that got me was The Family by Egon Schiele, and it was a portrait of him and his wife and their child, and it's unfinished because he and his wife died from the flu before he could finish it. That one got me. But it was talking about basically like why we don't see more of this representation. And one part I did think was interesting that was different from what they're seeing is different from COVID is that like the 1918 flu hit young people really heavily, where luckily this one is not. I mean, not that I'm just glad that
sword, you know.
I'm glad that the kids are okay. But yeah, the 1918 flu hit young people a lot, like mid-30s was like the biggest demographic. So like they hadn't been able to accomplish many things, which is, I think, why they said a lot of famous people were spared. But then they talk about the connection to today, and that was chilling. So apparently in September of last year, Trevor Smith did a parade to commemorate the people lost in the 1918 flu, and it was a parade in Philly, and they held up the names of people who had died, and it doesn't go into detail, but it says a collective called Blast Theory, and I kind of wonder if he was trying to do some sort of, I don't know, I'd want to look into it more. I don't know if they were trying to do some sort of like particle spread of the disease in a crowd, because they were talking about how that rally in Philly in 1918 made it like terrible in Philly in like 2 weeks. So I didn't know if he was trying to do something with that, or if it was just a commemorative thing.
Just like Liberate Michigan and Wisconsin and all those schmucks are gonna exacerbate things.
Yeah. And like, luckily, I mean, like, that one, it's tricky, right? Because like I said, we've talked about this. That was for the war effort. Like, the war was occurring. That was a really big thing. And it's like, in a way, I understand why the flu wasn't so prevalent in work, because it's not like, right, in every war.
There's something about the glory of war that seems to perpetuate depictions of it far more than any other kind of event, even, you know, mass pandemics and, you know, deaths of millions, I think.
And also, I mean, it was 100 years ago, and the type of like content that we have now was not a thing then. The way that everyone like everyone's a performer now. Like, everyone is performing on Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram every day. And I think that we hear more of the stories now because we're so ingrained in it now. But back then, I don't think those stories really maybe came through as much, or preserved, or left.
And it's hard because, like, so with every war, and this is the issue I have with comparing it to 9/11 too, like, human beings really love to blame an other. And like, that's like a way to direct your energy and to like do something and feel a justified way about it and everything. And like, there's nothing here. Like, I don't know, before we were starting this podcast, someone said something about like the injustice of it all. And it's like, yes, but like, there are people who reacted really badly, and we can be upset at them because they made it so much worse. I'm not going to say any names. But like, there's not like, this wasn't a conspiracy theory. This wasn't like a COVID bomb dropped on the US. Like, it's nothing like that.
It wasn't created in a Chinese lab somewhere or any.
Yeah.
Right. And even when it started, people tried to pull that shit. I'm sorry. Like, it's like, by calling it the Chinese virus, like, no, you don't get to make this something like that. So I understand in a way that it was more important, and the war was pretty important. Like, they needed the morale boosters for that. So it's like, choose your pick. Do you want to, you know?
Well, there's also a lot of downplaying of the flu because it was a time of war. The reason it's called the Spanish flu is because Spain during that time was not involved in the Great War, and so their press was free to talk about it. It started somewhere in the middle of Kansas in the United States, this flu, and spread to the entire, you know, world in a pandemic. So it didn't really actually start in Spain. Fun facts.
That is, I didn't know.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. I was gonna say though, like a huge difference too that is just like how we're creating media now is so much faster, and it's like, you know, that, and how we're creating art now is just like, I mean, I could literally go and film like a TikTok and it's gonna be up on the internet in less than, you know, like it's so, we produce art so much faster now that we're able to actually create art and just put that art on display now. Like, you know, it's not something where like, you know, you have to take years to produce something anymore. Things get done so much faster.
And that, oh, go ahead, Hannah.
It's prolific, you know, anyone with, you know, a camera and a computer or a microphone can do their own little short skit or do a podcast.
Yeah.
And actually transitions super well into the next article about theater makers making. So this article,
sorry, there you go.
the Remembered Active Assembly opinion, or makers should make whatever they want, which is a direct opinion article on what we discussed last week, the Remembered Active Assembly, or why theater makers should stop making. So it's kind of it's combating that article that we talked about so heavily last week. I think that's super interesting because we had kind of a conflicting viewpoint on it even last week, and this article really brings that point forward. And if people want to make art, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and kind of target specific points that Berger makes as a theater artist. And this is written by Siobhan O'Loughlin, who is also a theater artist. And they don't specify which area of theater they're in, but it is clear that they're colleagues, I believe is what's mentioned. It's a really, really interesting article. It's equally well written, and just takes Berger's points point by point and kind of dissects why that's kind of a narrow-minded view, and that, yes, it is positive, that you don't need to feel pressure to have those to produce. You don't need to have that pressure, but there, at the same time, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And it's not a belittled form of theater. It's not attacking theater. It's trying to preserve something. Yeah, does anybody else have anything on it? It's kind of a really dense article.
I think, I mean, us, as students in school who had productions that got canceled because of the quarantine and everything, it kind of, it's incredibly relevant because to some extent we were forced into these ulterior ways of producing the work and the art that we had already created. And I mean, none of my productions were affected, but I had this general feel from others I talked to where it was, they didn't want to. It felt cheapened because it was just a last minute kind of, we have to do something.
And the have to is certainly the issue.
Yeah.
One of the quotes from the art, this is this article quoting the previous article. This is the previous article. We must lean into this pain. We must feel the grief. We must mourn for the loss of work, for the loss of jobs, the loss of money, the loss of life, mourn the temporary loss of an art form that demands assembly, lean into the grief, lean in, lean in, lean in. And basically the article for this week is talking about how that mourning and doing nothing is equally destructive and can also be an issue. I mean, if you want to do more than that, you shouldn't be discouraged from doing so by any means.
Yeah.
Allison Gorecki brings up a really good... Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, go ahead.
She brings up a good point in her comment where she talks about the forgotten art of assembly article that they're referring to, and that Berger's suggestion to allow ourselves to relax and stop trying to create doesn't necessarily make space for the freelancers whose livelihoods depend on making art or music, who can't afford to stop because stopping means losing an audience and name recognition. Berger's article is focused on a slightly different audience of students and performers and companies who are desperate to do something right now, even though they can afford not to, which I thought was an interesting way to look at it.
Totally.
Yeah, I personally, like, this article to me, I thought was, for me, felt a little juvenile in terms of the fact that it was like, you can say what you want to say, like make your point, but like to come after like somebody else's viewpoint so heavily in the way that this writer did, I thought was a little just like, just like the way that they're portraying, a colleague of theirs, it's just kind of like, sure. Why do you have to do that? You don't have to do that. Just make your point. Like, people are still going to read your article, but it's like, why bring somebody else's viewpoint down to make your point better? It's like, I could have read this article and come out feeling differently if it wasn't so like, and I'm not like trying to defend the other article. I'm just saying, like, in general, like as from a writer standpoint, I'm like, okay, you don't agree with them, but like just let it be.
Also picking at words in a lot of these arguments where it's not that different in what they're saying.
Yeah.
Especially since there are two different arguments being made. One is saying you shouldn't force yourselves to make something just because you need to make something. The other one's saying if you want to make something, you should make something.
Right. That's really what it comes down to. They're different.
Yeah.
I do think it's very funny. Like, this generation is pretty much summed up in like those two articles. It's like, do what you want as long as it doesn't harm anyone and makes you happy. Like, it's very funny how that's very much a thing that is coming up more and more, which is like good. It's just funny, like maybe funny is not the right word, but Damien, like you said, like attacking one another for basically saying the same thing. It's like, don't feel pressured to do a thing. They're just saying different, don't feel pressured to, it's like.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like you lose credibility. Like you lose a little bit of like, yeah. I mean, you're disrespecting some, not even necessarily disrespecting, but it was just like, there was a tone to it that felt almost like defensive, and like, I feel like it's not necessary, especially if it is a colleague, like there's no, like make your point, but don't necessarily come after someone else's opinion. But I mean, like we do this all the time, and it is labeled as an opinion, but it's just like, I don't know. That's just how I felt.
So, no good transition. My opinion on this one is that they could have said more about the technology. Anyway, Rio de Janeiro uses cutting-edge technology to transform its giant Jesus statue into a doctor to honor healthcare workers, by Carolyn Goldstein on ArtNet. And I am going to scroll on this one because, like, it's pretty much all pictures, and it is really cool, basically talking about how on Easter Sunday they did a service at the foot of the Jesus statue, and they transformed it. They had flags, they had actual pictures of healthcare workers, they had scrubs and stethoscopes, stuff like that. So just a way to honor them. I do think that the title was misleading, because nowhere did it talk about the cutting edge technology that was used here. I mean, it's media mapping. That's cool. Saw that on Tiger. So it's not necessarily cutting edge. It's certainly newer in the fact that like media design is newer. But the specific technology they are talking about, A, is not talked about here, and B, is not so new. So that's just me.
It's just a bunch of pretty pictures.
It's just right,
on a happy note.
That's cool. That's great. Keep supporting them however you can, because they're
doing great stuff.
Really great. Really.
Don't go to wrestling matches.
I love that.
Yeah.
Don't go to Florida.
The Catholic
or
Church
Georgia.
of Brazil is doing this when their president is not doing this.
And they talked about that. That was actually something they mentioned in the article, was like, yeah, the president is not, and is reacting in a similar way to another president. So they kind of went against that, and they were like, you know what, we're going to do this nice thing that shows our appreciation and dedication to, I don't know, doing what's best for humanity.
Yep.
Fine.
On that note.
But yeah, so that's our podcast for this week, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll
end it on watching the Rube Goldberg.
Isn't it like 25 minutes?
No, it's 5.
Oh, why did I think it was super, super long?
I mean, it is super long.
Hey, Lyle, can you pass the pepper, please?
So good.
Are we really going to watch this whole thing?
Yes. I want to know where they live, that they have a kitchen or dining room long enough to do this,
Right.
No
or
kidding.
if this is not all in one take.
I bet it wasn't all in one take.
They just like moved the tables.
Yeah,
That's cheating.
based on
That's
how we've
funny.
seen how well Rube goes every year.
No way.
my-
They probably moved. It's probably the same table.
Well, but they have at least 3 of them.
Yeah.
Right. They're the same 3 tables. I mean, like they reset. I bet you.
Yeah,
It's
there's
the
Yeah.
same.
the
The light switch.
The light
Or
switch.
rather,
Ah.
the outlet.
A
Okay, we're
fake.
done. This thing is canceled. They cheated.
It's a fake.
We're done. I'm done.
Wait,
with
you
this.
still have to keep playing it at least to the table flip, because that is just the most ingenious.
Oh my god.
I love that.
It honestly though, knowing that, it is kind of
It's-
cool that they were able to do this.
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
that they knew it would all.
That means they reuse materials. Cheating.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Not as exciting. How far? I don't remember. How far in is the table flip?
I
Wow.
can't remember.
And that means they got to take each section trial by trial. The whole thing didn't have to function together.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Less
And they ruined a laptop for nothing.
I know.
That means they probably only did this once then.
I can't watch this.
I really hope that that's like a prop.
I'm so uncomfy.
I'm so uncomfortable.
I love the use of the injecting.
Oh,
This one is so clever, though.
right. Okay.
I mean, like, I'm happy that like the red goes in the red, the yellow in the yellow, and the blue in the blue.
It's very satisfying.
Right? That makes my heart happy. Dear God. That's cute. Oh, and there's a soundtrack.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's so good because it's a freak out because you think it's just gonna like pull the rug out again and then nope.
Oh my God. Seriously, creativity in all forms.
So good.
Peppers all of it for him.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Alrighty.
Well, that's been our podcast this week.
Yay.
Join us for next week, which promises to be equally as thrilling.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.